Hello folks, today I'm doing a bit of an interesting video. I'm going to be covering all of the permanent fusions that we have in the game and giving you my thoughts on them as an endgame low spend player. We're going to be covering essentially which champions I actually get use out of, which ones I don't get use out of, who you should be using, and all that sort of good stuff. As of right now, we have 4 permanent fusions in the game, so we'll start with the ones that we already have here in the portal. The first one is going to be Broadma. Broadma is actually a pretty decent champion for Faction Wars, so A1 attacks one enemy, has a 45% chance of placing a freeze for 1 turn. A2 is going to place the big version of increased crit rate and a increased speed, and then also filling the turn meters of all allies by 15% on a 3-turn cooldown. Not a bad skill by any means. And then the A3 revives 2 random dead allies with 25% HP. I don't know why it says dead, because obviously they're going to be dead if they're being revived, but placing a block damage buff on the revived allies for 1 turn, and this is on a 4-turn cooldown. Not too bad of a revive, and increasing ally defense in faction crypts by 33%. Overall, you can get some decent utility from this champion for sure. If we go and take a look at Lizardman, you're really stretching it thin for other champions with inside this faction if you're trying to get a reviver. You pretty much are looking at Sulfurion, I think. Yeah, Sulfurion has a very good revive here, as well as some burns, obviously. But apart from Sulfurion, I don't think there is actually a reviver. You could also get Cagebound, but if you're going to invest... Actually, no, Cagebound doesn't even revive. Never mind. I was going to say, if you're going to invest, just bring somebody like the Broadma there. It's this guy who revives, yeah, but this guy is definitely not the best. So Broadma, I'd say he's actually usable. I do have mine built out to 5 stars, not even fully booked or anything like that, and I was able to beat the Faction Wars with no problem. Faction Wars is one of those things that you can basically play it smart, or you can just bring a lot of damage. You don't need to have, you know, much for support champions or anything like that if you're just absolutely nuking through the content. Pretty much brute forcing it like that is how I beat a lot of the Faction Wars crypts in this game. I'm not even going to lie. So, Broadma, good champion. You don't need to depend on him a whole lot, though. Relic Keeper here is an interesting champion. So A1 attacks one enemy. I'm going to put the multipliers on the screen here at some point. Attacks one enemy, granting an extra turn if the target is killed. A2 is going to place a 50% increase attack buff on himself for 4 turns on a 4-turn cooldown, granting an extra turn. And when hit by an enemy, he's placing a continuous heal on himself for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. And then he increases ally attack in campaign battles by 40%. So I think realistically this guy was supposed to be a campaign farmer for new players, but at the end of the day, there's just so many champions that do this better. His animation, since it's attacking one enemy, it can be a very lengthy process to actually have him farm the campaign, even if he is one-tapping people. If we come over here to Sacred Order, we're certainly not short on damage dealers for this faction either, even in the epic tier. So I use Talia for quite a bit as my arena nuker. She's a very good way to go. You got Phoenix, who's like basically the hardest hitting A1 in the game. Deacon Armstrong can actually do surprisingly decent damage. We got also Inquisitor Shamel can actually smack pretty hard as well. I've heard Aothar can do some decent work. And then obviously we have a ton of amazing legendaries as well. There's also some decent rares in here, like Purgator can be a very hard hitting. You obviously have the starter champion Aethel, so realistically, Relic Keeper, I would not recommend building him. I've fused a couple copies of this guy now just because I want the points from the champion chase tournaments and those sorts of things. As you can see here, his reviews are, I would say, pretty accurate. You could maybe get some utility out of him in hard mode Spider if you can just absolutely crank his damage through the roof, but realistically, this guy doesn't even have like terribly good base stats either. Like 1300 attack is not the best, 90 speed. He's very slow. Would not recommend building him. The next champion is going to be one of the OGs on the list, so that's Rosin Scarhide. Rosin is actually reviewed pretty well. A1 attacks one enemy 3 times, so a triple hitter there. Has a 45% chance of removing 1 random buff from the target. This seems to be per hit, even though it doesn't say it. Damage based on defense, of course. A2 is going to attack one enemy, has a 75 books to 100% chance of placing a decreased defense and a weaken. And then his A3 is going to attack all enemies, decreasing the turn meter by 100%. So, thing with this is a legendary champion. I'm very dark on the screen for some reason. Hold on. It's just how it looks, apparently. Alright, we'll have to make do with it. This champion is a legendary. and this skill is on a 6-turn cooldown. So I don't know why he's got these reviews. I think it was from way back in the day when, you know, there wasn't as many legendaries in the game, and just getting somebody with turn meter control was useful. I do still get some use out of this guy inside the city of Centranos, but I don't even have him fully booked or anything like that. And if you're looking for straight up turn meter control, then you can just come over here and look at somebody like an Allure who just does it better on her A1, and you don't need to waste legendary books on that. Rosin, I do have him at 6 stars just because I was essentially bored and was just testing him out to see what I could make happen with him. I would not recommend building him. He does have one of the best arena auras in the game though, but you're not really going to be using this guy in arena because he doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Does have decent base stats. He is incredibly slow, long cooldowns, overall just not a very good champion, and I really wish they would buff him, but in all honesty they're probably not going to, just considering he's so accessible. The last champion on our permanent fusion list is going to be Lady Mikage herself. She has a large kit since she's a mythical. She's going to attack one enemy with one random ally from the Shadowkin faction, and they will use their default skill, of course. She's going to place a shield buff equal to 10% of her max HP on the ally with the lowest HP for 2 turns. This lady has almost 22k base HP, so obviously that's going to scale very well. Attacks all enemies, decreases the duration of all enemy buffs and all ally debuffs by 1 turn, then increases the duration of all enemy debuffs and all allied buffs by 1 turn. So there's a lot in this, and sometimes people gloss over it. So this is basically a cleanse for any of your 1-turn debuffs, so like stuns, sleeps, provokes, freezes, anything like that, she just strips straight off. This is going to extend stuff like poisons, decreases speed, hexes, all that sort of good stuff on the enemies. She's going to increase your buff duration while also decreasing the enemy buff duration. So if they have block debuffs up, increased defense, those sorts of things, it's going to fall off a turn sooner. She then places an increased attack and increased crit damage on all allies for 2 turns, then teams up with all allies to attack a single enemy. Absolutely fantastic skill here as well. Her passive is at the start of her turn, removes all debuffs from the ally with the highest attack. So basically, your nuker cannot be CC'd as long as you're using an attack nuker, as long as she's on the team. And then the aura's accuracy in all battles by 80. That was very loud. A2 attacks, or sorry, A1 on her second form attacks one enemy placing a sleep debuff. There's no chance of this, it just straight up places it. This is very similar to something like a Sifi. The only thing is this one can be resisted, so you do have to build her with accuracy. And she's going to decrease the target's turn meter by 15%. A2 attacks all enemies, just straight up placing a stun for 1 turn, also decreasing the turn meters of all enemies by 30%. Very similar to something that we're seeing like a Armand's now, except obviously she doesn't fully steal that turn meter. She's going to place an increased accuracy on all allies. Then she tries to strip all buffs from all enemies and places a 25% weaken on them for 2 turns. And her passive is at the start of her turn, decreases the turn meter of the enemy with the highest attack by 15%. This activates when she's metamorphed, by the way. If you couldn't figure it out by now, this is an absolutely sensational champion. She is fantastic. While I was making this thumbnail, I did actually notice that she has another set of eyes up here. I didn't even notice that before. I just noticed her regular eyes, but it's kind of freaky when you look at it. Absolutely fantastic champion, though. Even if you're not booking her, really the only book that you need on her Form 1 is just for the ally attack skill, right? Like the rest of this isn't very important. And then on her A2, basically all you really need again is the book on the A3 here. So just bringing down her cooldown. She is useful in so many areas, though. I use her all the time in the live arena. I use her in basically every tag team arena match. I use her in a lot of classic arena matches. I use her in Doom Tower, in City of Centranos, in dungeons, in Hydra. I use her as well in some of my teams. She's basically used absolutely everywhere on my account, and obviously she's a mythical, so you'd kind of expect that, but to get this value from a champion that doesn't even need books and that everybody can get, that is absolutely fantastic. And not only that, but if you need to, you can temporarily use some of the epic sort of legendaries from her fusion, of course, and possibly get some value on your account with those champions as well, considering that you can at least take them to 5-star, because then you can still feed them into her, obviously. I know for me, I was lucky enough to have a copy of Kriya the Watcher, but you might be able to get some use out of her, even just taking her to 5-star if you need an ally protector, right? So Overall, I think Lady Mikage is by far, and it's not even close, by far the best permanent fusion that we have in the game. I highly recommend everybody builds her. I highly recommend you spec your resources into her. The rest of them, honestly, you can probably just kind of ignore, especially those legendary books on Rosin, but Lady Mikage, you will not regret booking her out and using her. And just to kind of put my money where my mouth is, if we come in here and take a look, you can see that I do have her booked out on the skills that matter, the skills that I mentioned there, right? So obviously her Form 2 is pretty much booked out all the way, but I put my resources into her. Fantastic champion. I keep saying it over and over, but it's so true. This champion is absolutely incredible. If you're curious, this is my build for her as well. So fairly fast, fairly tanky, fairly decent accuracy. She's a great champion. I hope this helps you guys out figuring out where you want to invest your resources, especially considering that they're so limited in this game, of course. The Armand's fusion is wrapping up now. If you guys have had a chance to play test him, let me know what you think. If you have Armand's, and especially if you have an awakening from him, I would be very curious to hear what blessing you guys are going to be putting on him. So let me know down below what blessing it's going to be. I think personally I'm probably going to be running him with a sheep. With the polymorph, of course. So again, thank you guys for watching. Thank you also so much for the support on the channel recently. I'll see you guys next time.